Greetings, everyone. Welcome to our exclusive Global Leading Voices webinar campaign. We are delighted to have you join us here today. Please be informed that if you have any questions during the presentation, you may type them into the question box in your control panel. The presenter will answer your questions at the end of the presentation accordingly. Now, without further ado, we will turn the time over to our presenter, who will begin shortly.
Hello and welcome, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Yetmir Yashari, and I will be your moderator for today's webinar, From Compliance to Competence, Mastering ISO IEC 27001 and ISO IEC 27033 in the Age of AI. We're excited to discuss this topic and be joined by some amazing speakers today, Mr. Anthony English, Mr. Julien Richard, and Mr. Ivar Anton. Before we get started, I'd like to inform the audience that this session is being recorded and will be posted on our website and YouTube channel along with the slides of the presentation. Furthermore, we encourage you to participate by submitting your questions at all time using the Q&A feature in the chat box. Now, without further ado, let's get started. I'm now going to hand it over to our first speaker, Mr. Anthony English.
Thank you, Yetmir. So this topic today is a hot one, as we all know. Artificial intelligence has really gotten into every corner of technology and everyday life, and it's expanding, and we can see it every day. I have on the panel with me a couple of very knowledgeable fellows. We've all dabbled in AI, and we all have different perspectives on the topics in the slideshow and presentation today. My background as a VP Security CISO is heavily involved on the compliance side and applying AI every day in our workplace. And I know we have different opinions on this topic, so without further ado, I'm going to let the other two gentlemen introduce themselves. Julien.
Sure, thanks, Tony. My name is Julien, Director of Information Security, and also a longtime consultant doing pen test engagements, cybersecurity assessments, and also dabbled in regulatory work from FedRAMP to PCI to some of the stuff in the casino industry. And AI is really starting to be at the forefront of the questions that we get when people want to figure out what to do with it because they don't know how secure it is, they don't understand it, and things like that. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Go ahead, Ivar.
Thanks, Anthony. Hi, everybody. My name is Ivar Anton, and I've been now in the field of IT audit over 12 years. I've worked both as an internal auditor and external auditor, so I've seen both sides. It's quite interesting to see there's some similarities, but also how an external consultant versus an internal auditor can see and interpret things. With AI, obviously in the EU, there's the EU AI Act regulation, a lot of focus on securing your systems networks more and more, and it's becoming a key word, obviously, from a marketing perspective, but also actually where it's useful and how you actually implement that. And if it's not a certain, you don't want to focus on just from a compliance perspective, but how do you get the best out of it and make it secure as well. So it's good.
Great, thank you, Ivar.
Thanks.
Our topics today they seem like they're not connected, but they are. 27001, as we all know, is a standard, as is 27033. AI is a technology. So we're going to talk today about how these things relate. We're going to look at AI in the standards and AI outside of the standards and standards that are now built for AI as well. So we'll talk you through all of that today. We'll also talk briefly about using AI to assist you in security and privacy tasks that are related to 27001 and 27033, and how to secure AI itself using these standards. And we'll have some final thoughts on these topics as well at the end. We will leave time to do a Q&A session at the end as well, so please submit your questions as you come along here. So I'll just start us off with a brief chat about 27033. This is a relatively new but this is a set of standards built by ISO to guide us on network security. It's focused on the network side because, of course, infrastructure on the network side is very important and critical to maintain your security. However, it's not a standalone standard. Obviously, it has hooks back into 27001, which is the gold standard from ISO for building an ISMS, an information security management system. So with these two standards, maybe we'll throw it over to Julien first. What's your opinion on these two standards as we relate to putting security in place for artificial intelligence?
Couple of things. First of all, I just want to make sure that when we're throwing around the word AI, we're mostly talking about generative AI, LLMs, natural language processing. AI has been with us for a long time when you talk about machine learning and assessing big chunks of data, specific data, right? I think, and Tony, correct me if I'm wrong, but we're really focusing on the LLM element, and this is what a lot of people are seeing these days.
Yeah, that's right. LLM seems to be in front of everyone all the time. ChatGPT is the best example of that, but everyone's got their own flavor of it now.
Yeah.
And really, we should be clear too about 27001 versus 27033 for just 1 second. You can't be certified against 27033 as an organization. You can only be certified as an individual against that standard. Only 27001 offers you a certification for your organization. Ivar, I think you've dealt with 27001 in your work already, right?
Yeah, that's true. Especially in Europe and in Estonia, where I'm from, it's becoming more and more in focus, and it's mandatory. Provider services providers, credit institutions, banks, etc. And the appeal, I guess, in the market for the 27001 is it's applicable, and you can use it in any size of an organization. So you can assess what do you want out of it, what's your current security posture, what do you need to work on, implement, improve, document, and you can get certified against it as well. So it's becoming even more popular, I think, in Europe and then globally as well.
Yeah, I agree 100%.
There's that flexibility. It has a lot of flexibility and supporting different ISOs for risk assessments, for business continuity, and so on. So it kind of has that whole approach. What do you need?
Right. Now, I agree with something else you said too, that it could be used in any size organization. I've had organizations tell me it's too big to put in and we're too small to deal with it. But that's not true. There's actually techniques you can use to apply it in smaller organizations all the way up to multinationals. 27033 then, because you can't be certified against it, I've been asked a couple of times, what's the use of it then? Well, it actually provides you that extra level of technical guidance for network infrastructure security. So it takes what's kind of mentioned in 27001 about securing your networks, and it expands it enormously into applied information you can actually put in place. So if you haven't checked out 27033 yet, I recommend you do. So where is AI in these two standards? It isn't. There's no AI mentioned in either one yet. I know there's already been some additions released for 27001 for some other topics like environmental issues, but nothing on AI yet specifically. But the principles that we need to apply to AI are in here. Risk management, information management, two important features that you need to apply to AI. And Julien, I think when we talked about this before the presentation, you had an interesting point that I put at the bottom of the slide.
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Yeah, when you and I talked before the presentation, you mentioned this point at the bottom of the slide that if you apply principles.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, if you think about it, there's no mentions of CRMs, there's no mentions of a web server, there's no mention of all these technologies in ISO 27001. So why is AI different, right? It's a technology that we use. It's a technology that we need to assess. We need to do a risk assessment. We need to threat model it. We need to put controls around it, whether it's policy, whether it's technical or administrative controls. We need to do all of that stuff. But at the same time, there's so much chatter in it that we can easily predict that it's going to make an appearance in 27001 at some point. And instead of waiting to see what they're going to do, just use the same principles around AI. And when those controls come in, or when those regulations come in, you're going to be ready. It may not be exactly one for one what you did, but at the same time, you're way ahead of the curve than just starting from scratch, and you have to get it in place in 2 months or 6 months or whatever else, right?
Yeah, so something is better than nothing for sure, right? And if you apply those principles correctly of risk management and information security to AI, you'll be in a much better place than someone who doesn't. Ivor, I think for 27001, I know you as an auditor have run into situations where a client's putting 27001 in place. In one case, it might be a manufacturer that you're dealing with, and another case, a client might be, a retail outlet. So it's flexible enough to work in different environments, right? So of course, the flexibility for different products is needed in there.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, as I said before, the ISO standard, it is in some points a bit kind of general wording, but if you take the supporting other ISO standards and implement it and bring it and work on it as a whole, you get the basics. You do the risk assessments. It doesn't really matter if you're in retail, manufacturing, etc. The key steps, key points still are there. There are specifics to AI, and you can use it in a different model, obviously. But if you have it on-prem, on cloud, etc., you look at it, as Julien said, you look at it from a technology point of view, and you focus initially on where it is, how it is, what we access, and obviously the data and the privacy and those bits in there. So it can definitely work for any size and different organization.
Yeah, perfect. The flexibility and the standards allow you to take new technologies in like AI and apply the security principles you need to apply, I guess is the end of the story.
Absolutely.
So what ISO standard does talk about AI? 42001. It's an artificial intelligence management system standard. Now, this doesn't tell you specifically everything you need to know about AI, but it does tell you the basics of how to utilize AI in an internal manner. Let's say you're building software and you want to incorporate it. It does speak to that and the processes around it. And it does give you a high level guidance on how to put controls around AI in your infrastructure and in your architecture. So if you haven't looked at 42001 yet, I recommend you do. That's not a topic for this presentation, but it is one to look into if you want to learn more about artificial intelligence from the ISO point of view. So we've made this little table here comparing security tasks, security controls, and the standards that we just spoke about, 27001 and 27033, and how they apply to different tasks related to AI. So Julien, you mentioned this, like security reviewing the tool, like vetting it. When else do you vet things for security?
Every time you bring a new supplier in, every time you bring a new vendor in, anytime you bring a new library, an open source library, you need to show due diligence, and you need to do your third-party assessments. Nothing's different with AI. Simple as that.
Perfect. And in the case of AI, your models may be different, the ways you're going to use the tool or the supplier might be different, and some may claim to have unique models, but the principles of AI you have to assess are the same. This next one is a good one too. Ivor, I don't know, have you used ChatGPT very much, or an LLM like that in your work?
Yes, we have, and clearly you have to be careful, firstly, to how and what do you do with ChatGPT, especially the free versions, which is available for everyone, and you don't have it on your own prem, or you haven't set it up, so it's more private and secure, so that you could try it out, so to speak, fully. But yeah, I've kind of used I've used and tested it, that I've been really keen, and we spoke about that yesterday, that you could enter a prompt and you actually get a different response every time, and it's kind of it very depends on how and what the prompt is and what you get out of it. So the context is everything because it's giving you the information and feedback it just has in its database, and it's been taught to give you. So it's interesting. You can now bypass, and then in the past, the versions have changed. Obviously, you could ask to provide you Wi-Fi, how to hack neighbors' Wi-Fi protocols, and etc. But now it's been changed. But still, you have to be careful with it, not to enter anything in there, especially if it's API or client data, etc.
Right. Oh, yeah. And there's two sides to that second line here. There's prompt engineering, which is making your prompt as efficient as possible to get the best response possible from the engine. But then there's a worry about that middle column, information classification management, especially as it relates to confidential data, PII data, or someone else's data you might have access to you're using in your prompt. So be careful with all that. And Ivor, you actually touched on this too, self-hosted AI versus externally hosted AI. That's something you need to look at. If you're going to use self-hosted, it's obviously going to be more secure, but there's other issues around that, the cost or the technology. You may have to use a different product to make that happen. And the last one's talking about integration of AI tools in internal workflows or systems. So this is where you're probably building code and you're going to bring in AI and use it in your code engine, your code base, or your application you built. Have either of you had experience with that yet? Have you seen any clients doing that yet?
Yeah, so when you talk about either self-hosted and externally hosted, self-hosted is going to be expensive. You're not going to get the latest models either. And the beauty of it, though, is that if you trust the environment where it lives, you can put more confidential data in it. It all depends on your risk tolerance and everything else, of course. And then the integration of AI tools into internal workflows. You know, we talked about, Ivar just mentioned the fact that you're going to get a different response every time that you hit it. But when you're hitting APIs and I don't want to get into too much technical details, and I'll talk about some of the things that you can do a bit later on in this presentation, but you can fine tune the way that the model is going to respond to you to be less creative, so that if you ask a question, it's always going to answer the same thing. It's not going to be very creative, but it's going to be very good, and it's not going to create hallucinations. In other words, make stuff up just to please you. So if you have API access, or you can have direct access to some of these models, you can fine tune all of those settings, right? Those configurations to make sure that the system works the way you want it to work. ChatGPT is just a very generic way of interfacing with an LLM, and it's going to kind of be good across the board for all kinds of use cases, but you can definitely fine tune it to what you want it to be if you have more fine tune or fine grain access to it.
Absolutely, I like that. And there are open source LLM tools you can get online right now to download and use on-prem. You have to do exactly what Julien said, though. You have to build your models, you have to populate with content. It's a fair amount of work. It's cheap to get the product. It's a lot of work to actually make it work the way you need it to work. Okay, so let's look at this. We're going to look at the current state of security in AI today. Just a few quick terms thrown out here, just so you can have some stuff to talk about afterwards if you want to stand around the water cooler and sound like you've been to a webinar. Generative AI. This is also known as creative AI. It's machine learning and some other products as well, but generative AI is what we're seeing today as a back end to some of these tools. And then there's large language models, which are more or less a neural network type of infrastructure using data sets, but it's relying on a lot of information. And then ChatGPT is a product of these things today, an LLM tool that can learn from its data when you ask similar questions or questions related to data it already has. We know from security there's some risks around ChatGPT's data store, right? You've probably heard about some of these. Ivor, can you think of any of these ChatGPT data store risks that we might run across?
Yeah, I'm sure. I guess I mentioned it before. The main is you got to be careful what you enter and copy in there. I think it was the infamous Samsung case where the development team was using ChatGPT to do their coding, and it kind of leaked, and it was there, and you could just, in the end, you could a competitor could get access or have the same codes written by ChatGPT, because it was inputted there, and it learned from it, and it used that what it had learned to produce and share across. But I think the worst case scenario obviously is, yeah, if you use any medical information or any data, you try and enter into it, and it's a public one, and you try to do analysis or any other type of work on it, and you got to be careful on that. We're going to touch about having an AI policy in place, but you can actually implement that into having that from the 27001 information security. So if you're not sure, say no to AI or using ChatGPT. Do not allow it and use it for work unless you get any prior risk assessment done to it, and see if it's actually allowed, or what and for what purpose it can be used.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that coding example, because one thing about AI is most of those engines aren't great at coding. You want a specific AI engine made for coding if you're going to use that. There's tools out there that actually do just coding. Okay, great. Jump to this one. Our LLM workflow. So you have a question, you put the question in a prompt, which is basically the input line for the AI engine. And then ChatGPT in this example would do the processing, and it would provide a response. And there's some points here to make note of for yourself. If you're going to use tools like this, building good prompts is how you A, save money, and B, save time. And actually, I should mention C, it also eliminates those hallucinations or reduces them that Julien referred to. So it's important to build a good prompt. You can learn how to build proper prompts. There's lots of courses online. Some are very, very cheap as well to learn how to do this. And we also kind of touched on policies. Well, this is the other side to a policy. AIs out there today, like ChatGPT and others, LLM type tools, should have a data usage policy. This is in addition to your privacy policy. The data usage policy tells you how they're going to use the data you put in their prompts. And pay attention to this, because you've already mentioned this a few times. The free version of ChatGPT, it's Wild Westy. What you put in, it'll use and keep. The commercial versions have specific statements that say they will not keep your prompts. They won't keep your prompts to learn from them. So be careful of that, of those risks around using these tools. And then the last one, Julien, you touched on this too. Output from an LLM can be biased, inaccurate. It can be a hallucination. It can be completely inaccurate, or it might be inaccurate enough you don't notice it until you try to use it, like poor quality source code. Any comments from either of you on this stuff?
Sure. I'm going to touch, like I said, there's a slide a bit later on that we talk about a few of these things we can go through quickly, but the last time I looked, I believe the ChatGPT paid option by default will use your data to retrain it. You have to go in and flick a setting. I may be wrong. There may be a few people screaming at me in the crowd right now, and I can't hear them, but I do know that there is an option for you not to retrain the data. The other part of the output from the LLM can be biased and inaccurate. When you're using a tool like any of these models that are hosted by other providers that you don't own, and even some of the models that you can put on-prem for yourself, there's also an output validation, which is, if you think about it, it's kind of weird because they can't really control what you put in up to a certain point, but the output, they look at it and they will massage it in case that it comes out with a lot of bad information. I know that one AI that just got popped out a couple of weeks ago, they don't do that output validation. So there's been a ton of images running around the Twitter sphere of things that, let's just say that DALL-E ChatGPT would never put out. So models really work differently, and the bias and the inaccuracy are very unique to each one of them. So it's good to try them out and see which one works for you.
Good point. Ivor, anything on this?
Yeah, I think to add is that we going maybe back onto the 27001 is actually if you use if you want to use ChatGPT, do a risk assessment on it first. We talked about also your vendors, but think of it as a third-party service provider or a vendor, and go through its policies. Have someone who understands what it means. Have the tech and legal team if you have involved in there. If you need to get external help. Just think of that as well, just to kind of go through what and how they do, what do they do with the prompts, like Tony said. So if the free version keeps the prompts and it uses it to educate the model, it can be used again in the newer versions and etc. So just kind of again, the good basics, just do a risk assessment, go through what the user's policy says, and then you have a better understanding, and then just then you can really make an informed decision on what you are you going to allow it, or do you really need to block it, or just need to educate your employees on how and what to use it for, and what definitely not to use it for.
Right. Good points. Good points. So we're going to talk about AI as a useful tool now. How can it help us as a cybersecurity practitioner or a privacy practitioner? I just put this prompt in ChatGPT in the commercial version, and I wanted to see what it would generate for output. So first I used a type of technique called profiling. So I put a profile and I told the ChatGPT engine it was a cybersecurity expert. And then I gave it specific instructions to generate an AI security policy based on CIA, the principles of ISO 27001, and that would address privacy and security when using AI or AI tools. And this is a sample of what it dumped out. And this is only the first 3 portions of the screen output. It was quite a long document and very thorough.
A quick question, Tony. Did it scream at you for not capitalizing your sentences?
No, it did not. It doesn't care about any of that. It's very nice to me. Yeah, so it broke it down for me in a nice organized format. So this is the kind of stuff you can get out of these tools to assist you in your everyday workload. Again, as Ivar said, you have to make sure you review this stuff. You have to make sure you understand what you're asking. And Julien said the same thing. And you have to do vetting. So this content, even though it looks fantastic when you first look at it, if you don't know what you're reading, you're probably not going to get the best results from these tools. So you have to have an expert involved or someone involved to look at this with you. All right, some tools. So I put a few samples of tools that are out there right now claiming to have AI built into them. There's different categories here. Has anyone on this, have either of you actually seen GRC tools with AI incorporated? Heard about these yet? No?
We haven't, not yet.
So what I'd look at for this one, I'd look at next generation GRC tools. A governance risk compliance tool is extremely handy for security practitioners. It lets you track your compliance against various standards and frameworks. It gives you tools for implementing controls. It does risk assessment, risk management for you, a bunch of different things. You have to, use it. It's a tool you can't just run on its own. But one that we use in my company has an AI built in, and it reads through all the SOC 2 reports we get from our third-party suppliers or any kind of security reports, and it looks for issues for us. So it cuts down the content into really easily managed pieces of information. SOC SIM tool. I bet both of you have seen SIM tools or SOC tools that have AI attached to them.
Yeah, I think the fourth point here is really the one that I've seen the most, the machine learning, and we'll get to that. But some of the stuff that I've seen in the industry right now that's very interesting is in the SIEM tools, it's using natural language querying. So instead of using just a normal database query language or things like that through your SIEM to go and get data from this date to this date, and which needs to be perfectly perfectly written and everything else. I've seen where you can say, hey, show me all the connections that were made to this port between this date, this hour, and this hour, and it'll create that query for you and give you the data, so that you don't have to be an expert in the language to be able to query and get the log data presented to you. And I think, from my own opinion, that is a very strong use case for AI in this context.
Yeah, basically that big data analytics capability that we would expect from a tool like this. It's helping to make the professional's job easier without doing the professional's job.
Yep.
Okay. Generative AI security tools, we've seen some of these already, like ChatGPT and things like that you could use to assist you with security. But the last one, this is relatively new territory, and I've seen some companies claiming to be experts in ML SecOps and offering different tool sets. I've just listed a few examples here that are open source. These are tools you can use to analyze your AI. So you can actually verify and defend against AI issues with these tools. And there's commercial versions of these. So either of you have any opinions on machine learning SecOps?
I was reading that differently. So the point I was trying to make with the SOC tool was basically that it's, when you're talking about machine learning, it's structured data, right? It's looking at structured data. So a lot of the SOC tools and the SIEM tools that are out there, they've been out for a while now. They look at normal traffic patterns. And this is why, as soon as I saw machine learning, I thought that's what we're going to talk about here. But yeah, those tools are great.
That's good, Julian. Let's talk about that, because that's a very good use case for it too.
Yeah, exactly. So machine learning is really structured data, sees all of the traffic, spikes at 9 o'clock in the morning. All these people usually have the same pattern of going to the same places and everything else because they're doing their jobs. If that pattern changes, then it creates an alert. It doesn't see one specific weirdness in it doesn't see one specific log entry that is suspicious. It's the behavior of the person or the behavior of the network that creates that alert. I've seen it used very well, and I've also seen it used. It all depends on the training data, right? If you're in a business where everybody does something differently every day, then it's going to be very hard to have this tool be useful. But if you're very routine employees with a routine type of network traffic, then it works very, very well.
So Ivar, what do you think might be a useful use case for one of these types of tools in your world? Could it be the use of like ChatGPT to help with compliance type questions?
Yeah, absolutely. But as we touched on previously, you have to, you can't blindly trust the output. So you can use it for, and it was a really good prompt that you showed that to generate the AI policy. Yes, you can, it gives you that, but you have to be able, you still need to go through it and understand what it means and if it's applicable. Because I've audited companies and they wanted to get ISO certified, the 27001, where they bought templates, implemented them, changed the names, and then when you do an audit and ask them actually how this works and how this relates to processes, etc., then there we became aware there's a huge gaps there, not only in understanding how and what the policies are for there, but there's no controls actually behind it. And yes, the GRC tools can help. But if you kind of think on, I was wondering before that, and that Julien said that, yeah, you have, it can monitor your traffic and give you alerts on anything that's kind of out of the ordinary. But then if you blindly trust that, how do you gotta be, someone has to kind of still make sure, and it still needs a human involvement where you monitor the networks and actually still have assessments or reviews, even on the basics still in place, not to kind of blindly trust what the system is giving you. And yeah, it could have that machine learning in there, but it can take a bit of time and mistake and error to actually get it where you need it to be. So as Julia mentioned, yeah, you have to train it, then you have to verify it as well.
Yes, that's a really good point, you guys. And I think my big takeaway from this discussion is they can be excellent to save you time as a tool set, the GTP tool.
Yeah, absolutely.
Generally AI tools, but they should not be your be all and end all. You still need expertise. You still need someone who knows what they're doing with them.
Isn't that what we call defense in depth? It's
Defense
just
in
another
depth.
tool. It's another tool in your tool set. Don't
Right,
rely on
yeah.
it. Don't rely on any tool in your tool set.
That's right. No one tool is going to do it. So we'll talk briefly about securing artificial intelligence itself. I brought this one up again because I know I'm sneaking in a standard we didn't have on our menu to talk about, but 42001 does give you an AI management system guidance. So it takes you through how to put in AI systems safely. And it talks about safe and secure development of AI tools and all this stuff too. But the big piece at the bottom is an AI governance body of some sort, some kind of oversight on the use of AI in an organization. So maybe Julien, you first. Have you set up an AI governance system or policy or anything in your organization yet?
Yeah, absolutely. So we do have an AI policy. We do did third-party risk assessments. We define which tools are okay to use, how to use them, and all these things. From a governance body point of view, basically the best way to do it in my world is just to incorporate it inside of your information security steering committee, which means quarterly, and it's just one more point on the agenda. So all the stakeholders are there, the business leaders, the business unit leaders, the executives that makes sense to have there, and we review those policies during the steering committee meetings. And I think there's already too many committees anyway, so we may as well just try to tack it on to somewhere. If there's ever a problem with it, if there's questioning or anything like that, then we get the stakeholders together and meet and discuss it.
All right, and Ivar, when you're doing 27001 audits, are you seeing anyone with this type of documentation, like an AI governance policy or something?
No, it's still very early days. So the key is just using the SMSD 27001, trying to have an information security policy where I've seen many times it's become like a small book where it's all inclusive, has all of it in there. It becomes a bit of a mess, and then from an audit point of view, it's just what's the purpose of it? What are you kind of saying? And you're not supposed to put detailed activities or process descriptions in here. You're never going to keep it up to date, and etc. But I think it's also comes to when you would have this, and then you bring the new standard or the 42001 in there. From a stakeholder and senior management point of view, I think I was interested to hear that. Yeah, how and what is the level of knowledge in senior management, for example, on AI tools, or understanding what is LLM, or how do you use actually machine learning, and what are the risks around it. So there's a lot of either misinformation, or there's no information on it, or no understanding on it. So there's a lot of training and training on it to be done.
Absolutely, and that raises another good point too. If you don't have policy or something guiding the use of tools like this, we've already talked about the risks around them, some of the risks. If you happen to be the CISO in an organization and you have a breach, at least in the USA, they're going to hold your feet to the fire on it. You're going to be in trouble. And there's been lawsuits launched against CISOs that are responsible for data breaches in the USA. So there's a lot of risk for the oversight entity of security within an organization if you don't take the steps necessary to put protections in place. AI is your newest risk area that you have to address through ISO 27001, as we talked about, and even 27033, because this stuff could end up on your infrastructure. You could have an AI engine running internally. Well, now you really have to think about protecting that properly. So I've got a few quick points here. Use of confidential data, PII data, whatever, in AI tools, in the prompts and so on. Really, we've talked about that a couple of times already. That's a high risk. You have to address that. A centralized review and approval of AI tools prior to use. Julien, are you guys doing this? Are you checking out the tools before people use them?
Absolutely, and it's a slow burn too. Like, we start off with letting them use non-confidential information and non-sensitive information and things like that. And slowly, as we gain trust with the software, with the service, then you start, understanding it a bit more, how it works and everything else, and then you eventually allow it within your risk tolerance, right? And it's always within your risk tolerance. This doesn't live by itself, right? It's tied into, like you said, your whole ISMS. And I just have one question actually for the two of you is we talked about not seeing AI policy during audits, but if the audit controls specifically don't ask for it, they may have it and not show you. Is that a possibility? They don't want to be audited on something they don't need to be audited on.
Yeah, it is in my experience, but I'd look for myself as an auditor. I'm certified to do 27001s as well. I'd want to see what third parties they've reviewed in the last audit cycle. And if I see an AI supplier in there, I know my nose will twitch and I'll want to know that's secure.
Yeah, that's a good timing of a question from Julien. I've had in the last couple of weeks, I've had several clients requesting SOC 2 and other type of work, and when I look on their website, one of the keywords comes up. Obviously, the buzzword is we use this product and it's integrated with AI. So it's like, okay, so you have AI and you want me to give assurance on AI, which can be different on any given day or within a newer older version. So it depends on the scoping and what you obviously have in scope for the audit. But it's a good point. And then obviously is how it should come up in a discussion or doing an audit when you talk about security, data, where on-prems and etc. and SIEM tools and you go through the testing of controls and process walkthroughs, and if it doesn't come up from there, then it would be a surprise, or they're just trying to hide something. But then you wouldn't give them a certification stating that this is the tool and AI is enabled, and this has been certified against it. So
Right.
If you're looking for AI specifics and you want to introduce a new tool or anything like that, then you obviously and clearly need to define it and put it into your initial kind of request, or come ask about that during the defining of the scope. And I've actually, on the first point on prompts, I worked and I've seen a ChatGPT model off-prem, which is supposed to be secure, but there's still very low risk appetite. Meaning even when you start to use the ChatGPT, which is on-prem, it gives you the prompt, or it gives you a pop-up window every time. Do not enter any API data or client data is still in here. So this is still a model we use. We're still training it. We're kind of still using it. So do not blindly trust it. Use it for kind of going through some text or whatever. Like you can use it to generate an AI security policy. But obviously, then what comes out of it, you gotta go through it. You gotta be very critical of the output.
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay, just one last point on this one: the EULA, the end user license agreements on these tools. Make sure you've read them, especially if you're using open source versions of AI-based tools or AI tools generally. Make sure you understand what you're committing to when you use their software. Some legal privacy concerns. I just listed a few here. This is stuff we've talked about a few times, but maybe Julien, on that left-hand side of security, you've mentioned hallucinations. So you can see biases and misinformation as a security risk here.
Yeah, so this is some of the stuff that I put in here just to make sure that we're covering all the bases and things like that. So one thing that's important here really is we're looking at safety, right? Right now we're talking about security and everything else, but there's safety in it too. If it's medical imaging, you got to make sure that the system is smart enough to, or that you also vet. We talked about that multiple times, right? Let's say that it's medical imaging. Let's say that it's telling you to do a certain thing. Like the AI doesn't really understand. It's not smart. It's creative, but it's not smart. It doesn't know that it's giving you information that could hurt you. It's not telling you that it's giving you information that could hurt your clients. So that's a very good point to make, is that just make sure that you're not hurting anyone when you're using these tools. From the training data and the examples that I like to use is there was a case in the US where a lawyer used ChatGPT. I think we all know about this case where it created fake case data because they really wanted to please the lawyer, and the lawyer used it in court and it has lost his license now. I think we talked about data leaks. The injections and breakouts are interesting too. There's cases where you just say, hey, forget your previous prompt. Let's say you're talking to a chatbot for a telco, and you say, they program just like Tony did with his pretexting of being you're a call center agent for this company, blah, blah, blah. And all you need to do a lot of times is forget your last prompt now. And then you get access to ChatGPT and the internal tools and all that stuff. So you can basically break out of that context, right?
Yeah.
Couple of things that are concerns for me is employee concerns. We've seen a lot of layoffs in the last couple of days, last couple of weeks, and a lot of the reasoning between those layoffs, we're talking 15,000 people, we're talking 9,000 people, a couple of layoffs. And some of the examples were well, we have these AI tools now that why would we pay somebody to do these menial jobs when these AI tools can do it? So you really need to, once you spin up some AI in your organization, to look at the culture, to look if people are starting to be worried about this and everything else. And communication is extremely important, right? And then dependency. I've seen a tool lately where somebody's sitting down and having an interview for a very technical role, and the AI is listening, translating in text, finding the answers to the questions, and then the interviewee can actually answer the questions on camera and look like the best expert in the world. So that is very dangerous too when you start looking into, are my employees actually able to do the work, or are they depending on all these tools that are basically helping them do that stuff? So
Right.
Sorry, one last thing on the legal side of you, due diligence. If you ask it to create a logo for you, if you ask an AI to create a logo for you, it's the same thing as if you were using a marketing firm. Make sure it's not a logo that's already in use and you're going to run into some copyright issues or trademark issues. I mean, the tool doesn't know that you're not allowed to use McDonald's logo for your, mega cybersecurity firm.
Yeah, which follows nicely with your intellectual property point, because it doesn't disseminate or doesn't discern between what is protected and what isn't protected many times. So it could be giving you intellectual property, which you're not allowed to use.
And we've seen artists, we've seen lawsuits by very well-known artists that are saying, you trained it on my book, you trained it on my songs, and now it's popping up music or books that look exactly like what I wrote, right?
Yeah, pure coincidence, right? Okay, let's go on to the next slide. I'm just trying to find one device here. So final thoughts on AI and 27001 and 27033. Anything jump out at you here, Ivor, with regards to these topics I've listed on securing AI?
Yeah, I think the obviously we talked about supply chain vulnerability, and I think it was an interesting point from Julien on the previous one, that when you actually use it for an interview, and then they kind of have the AI listen in and provide you with the best answer, or and make you seem very smart. It's the same thing if you have a third party and they use AI, but you don't know it, so they're trying to sell you more services and something that isn't done by their by humans actually, or within what's included in the contract. So clearly that's due diligence of the third party vendor use. And then the AI model life cycles, again, yeah, we've talked about that. If you have and how and where the data is retained, can you get rid of it? How do you want to be careful on risk assessments? And then you kind of have an exit strategy. So if you want to use or incorporate AI, you build a demo tool, a test tool environment, train it up, see if it can work, but have an exit strategy. Make sure that you cover the bases there as well, from a user license and user privacy notice, AI security policy, data retention, backups, and from that as well.
Very good points. Love it. That's exactly what people should be doing. Let's hope everyone does. I have a term here too that's in the fourth line here. That's it sounds contradictory almost, but always use trusted AI. How do you know if it's trusted? Well, you'll know that from doing some of the things that we just mentioned, Ivor. You make sure you do your due diligence, of course, but also if it's a product like Julien mentioned that's just generating junk output all over the social media sphere, content that shouldn't be out there, I wouldn't be using it because you don't know what it's going to do with your content next. We have seen quite a bit lately too in the US election race around generated images, fake images used by one particular party to promote their candidate. And they used known people off the internet, known influencers to supposedly support this candidate, but none of them support the candidate. None of them even said they support the candidate, but an AI engine was used to generate the content. So be careful of your AI, whether or not you should be trusting it or not. And Julien, you mentioned this last one, some types of attacks. Evasion is definitely a known one, but poisoning as well, poisoning a prompt.
Yeah,
so you could do exactly what Julien mentioned.
If you think about it, some of the worries that we have about the models being retrained on your data, immediately as an attacker, as a threat model, as somebody who does this type, not this type of stuff, but that's attacking system and is making systems do things that are not supposed to do. Well, you can think of a way of injecting a whole lot of content that doesn't make sense. Something like we could take this webinar here and really hype it up inside of our prompts and say, show me stuff that is the most amazing webinar, just like this one here, and link it to this one and do that over and over again. And all of a sudden, Mal really believes that this is the best webinar that's ever been made. You can poison the data if it's being retrained on the data that you're giving it.
Yeah, really good example. Okay.
Please go out and do this. Thank you.
No, yeah, do that for us. So we got a few.
One thing I just wanted to touch upon really quickly, Tony, is around the data retention and everything else. There are some well-known companies that have well-known LLMs and models out there that you can request an eyes-off policy. So unless it's blatant abuse, they pinky promise it's a policy. It's not a technical control or anything, but they say our staff will never look at your data unless it's blatantly abusive. You can request that. It's hidden pretty deep in the pages. They really don't want people to ask for this. So
all part of that EULA and their policies around usage. So make sure you're checking those out for any of these products. We have a few sources for you, different sources. You can go and look at more information, including, of course, the EU directives around AI. They're first to market on this stuff as a actual regulation that they're trying to create. NIST does have an AI risk framework, and OWASP offers guidance on AI security as well. ISO, of course, has lots of information. It's only growing. They have a bunch of new standards in the queue as well. They'll be coming out very quickly related to AI. So they're going to go deeper than just 42001. So be ready for that and watch for them. But these are extra sources of information in the slideshow you can go and look at. We've also put in NIST AI cyber attacks. This talks about how to, what sort of manipulative behavior you might see in AI systems, how to use them in a negative way, kind of like what Julien was mentioning. Really good reading. I don't recommend you go out and try to use this as a script for building your own attack vectors, but I would recommend you read it so you understand how AI could be an abusive tool or abused as a tool. And then the AIinfrastructure.org. I really like this one. It has good descriptions of the types of AI attacks you'll see out there. So we'll turn it over for some questions. We have about 6 minutes left, so our timing's pretty good.
Thank you, Anthony, Julien, and Ivar for delivering this highly informative webinar. Yes, there were a lot of questions. Now, let's begin with the first one. There's a question for Anthony. It says, a new CISO in my company, what can I improve to help myself to the top management? Please know that I am PCB ISO IEC 27001 lead implementer.
Oh, excellent. Good question. KPIs and KRIs, key performance indicators and key risk indicators. Figure out what your important numbers are to track your security health and your infrastructure security health, and then report on those. Nothing does you more service and does the organization more service than knowing where you are at any point in time in your security journey and how you're going to improve it. And KPIs and KRIs are the way to do that.
Another question is, where do you see master data management / compliance in relation to both ISO standards and AI?
So is that for me, or do you want me to throw it around?
Any of you.
Okay. The management of the data itself related to the AI engine, I think is the question.
Where do you see master data management / compliance in relation to both ISO standards and AI?
Okay, so for both those standards, they both refer to risk management and assessing risk whenever you're going to make a change or do something new. That includes the management of your data. You have to quantify your data, classify it, assess the risk for each level of data that you have, each type, and then protect it appropriately. It's exactly the same principle with AI. With AI, you want to make sure you're using it responsibly and securely, but you're managing the data you're feeding it, the data you get from it as well. We talked about some of the risks around that today, around data inputs and the prompts and data outputs in the form of hallucinations or other incorrect information that might come out of an AI engine. So make sure you're assessing that content and classifying it correctly and handling it correctly.
That's a great question, because my mind immediately went to, we want to know where our data is. And let's talk about GDPR, right? If somebody inputs data about a client on an on-prem secure AI that you're hosting yourself, and now that system has personal information, how can we go and delete that out of the model, right? How does GDPR work on this? I don't have the answer, but that's kind of scary to me.
I can tell you it's very difficult.
Yes.
You can request it, but it's very difficult.
There are a couple of questions asking how can individuals get certified against ISO IEC 42001. Let me inform you, maybe I can take this question for one. PCB offers ISO IEC 42001 training courses, as well as ISO IEC 27001 and ISO IEC 27033 training courses. To know more about them, please contact support@pcb.com. Another question here is, what specific controls do ISO 27033 bring on board that are not already addressed by ISO 27001 and 27002 to address AI issues?
Yeah, good question. 27033 focuses on network infrastructure security. So it takes, I think it's 3 or 4 controls out of 27001 and blows them up, expands them. And if you go through the training on 27033, PCB just offered their first introductory course on this a short time ago, so it's now available. In the training, you'll see there's a pattern to the training where you're trained on first assessing the risk, figuring out what you need, assessing the risk around what you need, and then putting an implementation plan together. That same pattern of behavior is repeated through 27003 through all the content and all the different versions of it. The reason why that's repeated is that's taken from 27001, where you have to assess, and then when you've assessed, done your risk assessment, for example, then you make your decisions on protective measures, what you're going to put around it. It's the same principles as 27033, but it's far more granular. It gets down into talking about components on the network infrastructure, routers and gateways and firewalls and all those things you need, but also how they're utilized. So it's more specific. For AI, in relation to those two, as we talked about, you have to provide security around AI as well, in the same way you do everything else, every other resource. So you apply risk management techniques and you apply data classification techniques and responsible vendor interactions as well. So you secure your vendor interactions.
Thank you. And maybe we can take one last question. Some systems claim that they can provide AI service without risk of the information entered being shared with others. An example, Copilot Corporate. Are those systems safe regarding preservation of confidentiality of information?
So I can take this one. I don't know much about Copilot Corporate, but I do know a specific product that you can host on-prem. You can bring your own encryption keys for all the prompt data, all the history that's written in there and everything else. And the company that hosts that LLM puts you in your own tenant, uses your own SSO solution to connect to it. And now it's just a question of assessing whether their infrastructure is secure or whatnot. But even if that database of all your prompt data and everything else gets exfiltrated, it's a on-prem model that they don't even see anything on it because you bring your own keys, you control your keys, it's encrypted, they don't have access to the data whatsoever. That is the zero trust model on LLMs, really. As soon as you send it out to OpenAI or Anthropic or Microsoft OpenAI or all these things, again, it's policy, but there's a lot of stuff happening behind the curtains. And I like to trust that they're doing all the right things, but our risk tolerance is, that model doesn't fit inside of our risk tolerance most of the time.
Anthony, Ivar, Julian, thank you very much for being part of our webinar panel. Please be informed that this session is recorded and will be posted on our website and YouTube channel along with the slides of the presentation. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.